It's a popular belief that the television industry is a big, incestuous cabal of dirty dealings and messes swept fastidiously under the rug. As a person who's worked in pretty much every job that business has to offer, from collecting coffee to full-on producing and directing, I have no intention of dispelling any of those notions. The whole game is a goddamn toxic mess, and I'm glad I got out of it. But let me tell you, it's what they don't release to the public that's so much worse. There are a million stories about people getting eaten by the machine, chewed up and shat out on the sidewalk to bake in the LA sun. Countless budding writers, aspiring starlets, and big glitzy personalities have been crushed under the collective boot of the business I've long been a part of. But I'll leave those for the tabloids. I'm not here to spill the beans on the heroin addiction of a 90s child star, or the breakdown of numerous pop princesses after they've been built up and knocked down by the latest groundbreaking talent show. I'm just here to talk about Colleen Fairweather. She was slated to be NBC's Golden Girl in the 90s, a screen presence with brains, charm, and versatility. There was a certain magic to Colleen that hadn't quite been seen before or since, and she was one of the rare people in show business who I was sure, despite all the cutthroat politics of it all, would have her pick of the networks. I was lucky to work with her on a handful of projects, and I can attest to the peculiar magnetism she had. Let me guess, at this point you're probably wondering, if she's all that, why haven't I heard of her? We'll get to that, don't worry. Colleen had a handful of minor roles on talk and variety shows, though I believe those episodes of their respective shows have been cut from syndication. Bring up the name Colleen Fairweather to Letterman, and I guarantee you the old bastard will get misty. That's the nature of the trade. When you're someone like her, everyone knows you. And when you're someone like her, everyone is equally willing to deny your existence once you've gone. That's showbiz, kid. My brushes with Colleen were mostly relatively transitory, just little hellos and how's it goings whenever we crossed paths. My last major professional interaction with her was a production role on a pilot that had been her baby since long before she got into the television business. She told me she'd had the idea copyrighted since her mid-20s. Anyone else who pulled something like that would get laughed out of town, but not her. She added a certain gravitas to everything she pitched. "It's gonna be big, Mike," she told me, her voice full of that trademark unwavering confidence. "It's new, it's fresh, it's the enema television needs right now." "Are you sure it's not a little, I don't know, esoteric?" I remember asking while reading the written pitch over again. "Esoteric? Nothing esoteric about it, Mike. Fear is in the blood of the American people. We love it. We feed on it." "Alright, Lovecraft, calm down. Look, I have faith in the fact that you could execute it, but I have no idea how we're gonna sell this to the network. It could destroy our credibility." "Not if it's true." This gave me pause. "The thing is, Mike, the American public is getting sick of being drip-fed celebrity gossip and fluff pieces like they're on some kind of shitty IV. That's what all the other talk shows are doing. We can release something really impactful here, Mike, something that can change the game." "Well, Colleen, you said it yourself. Only if it's true. No network will buy some jack-off host screaming at pretend spooks." Time would later prove me wrong on that one, as a quick browse through modern entertainment channels will tell you. "You're gonna have to give me a leap of faith on this one, Mike. I've got a contact, something special, something real. We just need to produce a pilot. That's it. I guarantee you the network will be on it like flies on shit." I reclined in my chair and sighed, rubbing a hand across my already balding cranium. There could sometimes be an unsettling intensity to her, perhaps just a symptom of overconfidence, but she was a hard person to say no to. In another life, she could have been a dictator on some tin pot nation in the Pacific. Okay, I said with a sigh, finally breaking. But on your head be it if this thing gets rejected. Don't expect me to take the fall for Casper the friendly fucking ghost. She nodded and smiled, knowing that she'd gotten what she wanted. It was going to be called Fairweather Nightmares, a talk show with guests who weren't celebrities, but people who have had brushes with the frightening, gruesome, or paranormal. The serial killer victim that got away, the alien abductee, the person who had irrefutable evidence that their house was haunted by a malevolent spirit. If it had been pitched to me half a decade earlier, I wouldn't have given it a second thought, but the X-Files craze had been sweeping the nation, and paranormal fuckery seemed to be flavor of the month. The show would have been an okay cash grab if it could be produced cheaply, just making a quick buck off the American zeitgeist. But she didn't see it like that. No, she wanted it to be some groundbreaking landmark of television, rather than the corny ratings ploy I was looking at. Perhaps back then she saw further than I, but looking back, we were both deluded. I got a crew cobbled together and had a set designed to Colleen's specifications. I've got to admit, for someone who seemed made for television on the outside, the more you talked to her, the more you realized that her actual disposition was planted pretty firmly in the alternative. She wanted the set to be minimalistic, largely black and framed by long red drapes on either side. She was also very specific about the paintings she wanted on the wall behind the tarnished leather sofa where the guests would sit. Bosch, Munch, Goya, real weird shit. Part of me knew that in the very slim possibility that the network would be interested in the show, they'd definitely ask for some set changes. I would have sympathized with that. Just standing there looking at it from behind the camera, I felt like I was having some sort of weird fever dream. No exec with his head screwed on straight would believe that the American public was ready for Twin Peaks, the talk show. Colleen was different though. She was in her element. That strange woman. She turned up on recording day like she was walking on air, this huge clownish smile painted across her face. I barely even noticed that she had a miserable looking family in tow when she walked into our section of the soundstage. "It's perfect," she said, an almost sing-song quality to her voice. "I knew you'd pull through for me, Mike." "Yeah, well, I hope you can do the same," I said. "I've been losing sleep over this goddamn thing." The family that Colleen had brought in were far too young to be hers. The two parents couldn't have been out of their 20s, and the little girl with them looked about 7. I knew from the outset there was something odd about her. She seemed so gaunt, so empty. Ashen skin and hollow cheeks, like she was malnourished. "And, who are your friends, Colleen?" I asked, trying to disguise the nervousness in my voice. "Oh, these are the Baxters. They're our first guests." "Right, a pleasure to meet you all," I said, though I wasn't really feeling it. "So what's it with you? Alien abduction? Haunted house?" They all looked at each other, confused and frightened, like a drunk driver who'd just been asked to take a breathalyzer test. Colleen always spoke on their behalf. "You'll see," she said, with another dangerous smirk. "When will we be ready to record?" "Give us 5. And then we'll see what we can do." I won't talk you through the sound tests, lighting, and the makeup process, because those details are non-essential to the story. Perhaps I should be telling you that I had a funny feeling, that some part of me knew this broadcast was damned from the outset, but it'd be a lie on both counts. The only reservations I had were about the state of the little girl's health, and how that'd turn out on camera. But all other worries were muted by the very tangible fear that my career could take a hit if Colleen's passion project tanked. Even when Colleen was sitting in that desk, and the camera was about to start rolling, I was having terrible visions of myself passing fries over the counter at McDonald's after decades of hard work to get where I was then. However, those worries quickly dissipated when filming began. Colleen, like many great talk show hosts, opened with a monologue, but hers sounded like it should have been delivered by Vincent Price rather than Conan O'Brien. "Welcome one and all to a television experience like no other," she began, gesturing grandly like a circus ringmaster. "All great television crosses boundaries, it's a fact of life. Talk shows cross personal boundaries, giving information about one person to another. Game shows cross the boundaries of human emotion, delivering excitement and pleasure in the comfort of your living room. And a good fictional drama will, invariably, cross the boundary of fiction and reality, making your heart ache for the non-existent product of acing and writing. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, good television is the art of crossing boundaries, but there's one boundary that I, Colleen Fairweather, don't believe has ever truly been crossed on television. That, my dear viewers, is the boundary between life and death." When she paused, the room was flooded in deafening silence. I think every one of us was floored by her delivery. "This," she said, a smile broadening across her face, "is Fair Weather Nightmares." This would be where we'd insert the opening credits, but I had to try with all my might to stop myself from clapping. I'd seen Shakespeare delivered with less passion at the West End, and to think she wrote it all herself? It was unheard of at the time. I'd gone from seeing doom to seeing dollars in the space of a single monologue, and felt boundlessly grateful that this was a project my name would be indelibly attached to. It didn't start going south until Colleen began interviewing the Baxters. "We have a very special guest tonight. She's here with her family," Colleen said, turning her attention to the Baxters as the camera did the same. "Helen Baxter is one of the youngest spiritual mediums in the world. She's able to contact the spirits and allow them to manifest through her body." The girl remained silent, but her young mother spoke up. "Technically," she said, "Helen is a conduit. She's a narrow corridor between our world and theirs, with a locked door on our end. When she calls them, spirits can wander down the corridor and peer out through the keyhole." Colleen grinned. This was exactly the sort of spiritual-sounding nonsense that raked in gullible viewers. "Do you do it often, Helen?" Colleen asked. "No," the little girl said, her voice as faint and shaky as her appearance would lead you to believe. "Not on purpose." "So it can happen accidentally?" "Yeah, it can." "Can you talk us through it, Helen?" Helen let out a long sigh and nodded. "I have to focus real hard to keep them out," she said. "They're always there, always. I can hear them scratching at the door. If I don't try to keep the door shut in my head, they'll just wander inside." "What exactly does having them inside feel like, Helen?" At the time, I thought maybe it was just paranoia and that I was the only one noticing it, but Helen was looking visibly distressed. Part of me wanted to call off the show and assess the situation a little clearer, having known the kind of unscrupulous parents willing to pimp their kids out for fame and fortune before. But Colleen had everyone in a trance. This was her show, and we were all just along for the ride. "It feels like being in the center of a crowded room, and you can't do anything, even if you wanted to. You just feel yourself being covered in cold hands, stroking you, groping you. You try to scream, but the sound never comes out. You just sit there, quiet, as something moves your arms and legs and talks with your voice. If ever there was a time for logical intervention, it would be when a miner said that on a show intended for primetime television." "That's fascinating, Helen," Colleen said. "I think millions of Americans will have aching hearts for you right now, even if they can't fully understand your experience." "What if she showed you?" the young father said, his face glowing like a teenage boy who'd just discovered the Sleeping Beauty. I wanted to curse the bastard, but it became clear to me in that moment that Colleen had planned all of this. She was the one who found these yahoos. She was holding all the cards from the beginning. "That sounds like a fantastic idea," she said, interlocking her hands with excitement. "Do you think you could give us a little demonstration, Helen?" That poor little girl just gave another sullen nod. She was about to be humiliated on national TV. "You heard it here first, folks," Colleen said with a laugh. "Authentic contact with the spirit world. Not bad for a pilot, is it?" They all laughed it off like hyenas. The charm was lost on me now. "Well, whenever you're ready, Helen. We don't want to rush you." I expected the cliché playbook. We've all seen the goddamn Exorcist. I was practically holding a bingo card while I waited for it all to unfold. Maybe she'd speak in tongues or start swearing and convulsing. Maybe she'd get her eyes to roll back into her head, or she might even puke if she was particularly dedicated to the ruse. Either way, it made me sick. But that's not what happened. To begin with, she sort of just collapsed like a rag doll back into the seat, her eyes closed. She remained like this long enough for me to consider cutting and calling in a paramedic, but just as I was on the precipice of doing so, her little green eyes suddenly opened and she started sitting back up. Funny thing is, I'm absolutely positive that they were blue before she fell down. For a moment or two, she just breathed heavily. They were labored, ragged breaths, like she wasn't used to breathing and was just trying to get the hang of it again. And then she spoke, in a deep male voice. "Where am I?" She, or rather, whoever was speaking through her, said. "How did I arrive here?" I was aghast. This had to be some kind of ventriloquism, a variety of weird, live dubbing that I'd never seen before. I started scanning her as best I could for hidden speakers, but the more she spoke, the more impossible it was to deny that this voice was coming from her mouth. "You're in a studio," Colleen said, treating this as though it wasn't completely and utterly fucking insane. "You're safe here, don't worry. What happened to you?" The voice coming out of Helen became frantic. I was in a nightclub," he said, as though trying to reclaim fading memories. I was having a good time, but I felt sick, and I went outside to get some fresh air, and a guy asks me for my wallet. I tell him I've not got any money. I tell him to leave me alone, but he pulls out a knife. I go to scream to alert someone of what's going on, but he sounded like he was on the edge of tears by then. Helen's facial expressions matched his terrified rantings. "He just stuck it in my neck, and I fell down. God, I was bleeding. There was so much blood. I could feel my life leaving me. Then there were all these hands. They were pulling me out of my body and into the deep, cold black. They were doing things, such terrible things. I don't want to go back. Please, don't make me go back." Suddenly, without warning, Helen erupted into a long, hideous scream before collapsing back on the sofa. When she awoke, her eyes were blue again, and her voice had returned to normal. "That was incredible, folks," Colleen said. Even her normally infallible confidence seemed to have been rattled by what we'd all just witnessed. "A live communique from the spirit world. I don't think we've ever seen anything like it." Helen Baxter looked like she'd just run a marathon in metal shoes. She was a thin, pale waif before the incident, but afterwards she looked like a noodle with celiac disease. I was a hair's breadth away from calling the whole thing off and getting an ambulance on the phone. "Now, for the good people tuning in a little late, Helen," Colleen said, some spark ignited by the potential for fame burning away behind her eyes. "Do you think you could do it again?" I don't think I should," she practically whispered. "I promise it'll only be once more, sweetie. And then we'll be done for the rest of the interview. I'll call in my next guest and you can have a nap in the break room." Helen looked at her parents, perhaps hoping that they'd defend her from Colleen's demands. Her hopes were quickly shattered when they just grinned and nodded, negligent bastards. "Go on, sweetie, you can do it," her mother quietly encouraged. Finally, Helen resigned herself to the uncomfortable process and gave another long sigh. A moment or so later, she collapsed back onto the sofa again, preparing to rise with a different identity. It took her a little longer to wake up this time. Something was unquestionably wrong. When she did wake up, and her eyes fluttered lazily open, they weren't blue, nor were they green, brown, or grey. They were a deep piss yellow, iris, sclera, all of it, and the pupil had been reduced to a reptilian slit that bisected the corner of her eye. Her voice betrayed no obvious gender. It was deep, guttural, and above all else, impossibly cruel. It was a sound altogether difficult to realistically describe.
"It's good to be back,"
she hissed with a quiet chuckle.
"I've been waiting for a little while. Didn't think she'd ever open the door to me."
Colleen seemed to be oblivious to the danger that was now looming over this whole situation. "What's your name?" she asked to the voice projecting through Helen. I still wasn't sure if she was really buying it or not.
"There's no point trying,"
it said.
"This little girl's mouth wouldn't be able to wrap itself around my name. And even if it could, you wouldn't understand it."
"Can you tell us who you are?" Colleen asked instead.
"You ask a lot of questions, don't you?"
it asked back.
"Does that gratify you, Colleen? Give you some illusion of purpose?"
"I'm trying to be civil here," Colleen said, keeping her composure somehow. "I ask you to do the same."
"Ah, you're asking again. It's getting dreadfully boring."
The young mother spoke. "You're on television. Say something for the camera." The thing laughed through Helen.
"Shit, fuck, cunt,"
it said, giggling to itself. "We'll, have to bleep that out," Colleen said, the bizarreness of the situation finally beginning to dawn on her. "I think perhaps we should move along. Thank you so much for—"
"But I just got here,"
the voice of Helen said.
"I don't want to leave. It's dull where I come from. The only sound there is screaming. Here, at least I can see myself think, in spite of your irritating questions."
I thought it was a trick of the light at first, but Helen looked like she was getting taller. Moment by moment, the bottom of her skirt got further away from her shoes, and her stick-thin arms protruded further from her sleeves. I began stepping backwards in shock and awe as the little girl stretched and elongated into something else in front of me. "What the hell is going on?" Colleen asked the young parents, but they had no answers. Helen continued to warp and bend until she no longer looked like a little girl. She was long and hunched, her skin stretched tightly across her bones, her lips had pulled up, revealing teeth and gum, as something large seemed to bulge in her throat. "What the fuck is happening?" I said aloud, my voice finally returning to me. Colleen seemed frozen in place as an impossibly long tongue spooled from Helen's mouth, dangling around her knees. It was black as tar and stank twice as bad, and appeared to sharpen to a point at the very end, almost like a stinger. "Oh dear God," Colleen said, as she finally began pacing backwards. "What the hell have I done?" She never got an answer to that question. The creature's tongue whipped at her, embedding its stinger into the base of her throat and slicing effortlessly through her trachea. I saw its black, pointed tip emerge from the back of Colleen's neck as blood came cascading down her chest and body. The tongue ripped its way back out of her with an audible crunch as Colleen collapsed onto her desk, face down. Naturally, I began sprinting for the exit as the loping Helen creature started chasing its parents. Somehow, in the confusion, a studio light was rattled from its hinges and came crashing down onto the set. The wooden floorboards and Colleen's precious red drapes caught fire in no time, and before we knew it, the entire soundstage was practically engulfed in flames. It probably could have been extinguished if someone had ran back and dealt with it in its earlier stages, but people would rather take their chances with the stampede than face whatever the hell that little girl had turned into. I made out just in time, though I often wish I didn't. That night was a night of screaming and burning. Upwards of 40 people were killed in the blaze, but how many of those 40 were actually killed by the blaze is still an open question. They found Colleen's smoldering corpse and parts of what we believe are the young parents. It took weeks to scrape the charred bodies of lighting coordinators and set designers off of the walls, and even longer to identify them and see to it that they got a proper burial. And worst of all, they never found anybody that was even closely comparable to the monster that started this whole mess. And God knows where it is now. It's haunted many a nightmare of mine since that day. The studio issued a gag order once they'd found out about the situation. We were paid off or threatened with the loss of our jobs if we didn't sign their mountains of non-disclosure agreements. They made the whole thing disappear, and everyone who died on that tragic night had their deaths reduced to mere accidents, the result of a freak fire breaking out. Nothing anyone could have predicted. What a bunch of bullshit. No justice, no answers, any sense of satisfying closure for anyone involved completely taken out of the picture. The tapes we had of the event were destroyed in the fire, and worse still, whatever evil we all had a part in unleashing on that day is still out there, somewhere. Then again, I don't see any point in getting all that angry about it. That's just showbiz, kid.